risk that's inherent to that is that the creosote that comes out of the fire that we normally are supposed to contain and sweep out can now start to build up outside of the flue system. If it does, then you end up with a situation where even if you clean this chimney, and this chimney is very clean right now, even if you clean this chimney, you can end up with a cache of fuel building up in an area where we cannot access it to clean it, and we cannot assess it to know how much this fuel is there. So while I'm not saying that there is a cache of fuel behind that gap right now, what I am saying is that there could be, and we'll never know. And over time, that risk factor continues to just increase and increase. Um, the second problem with that situation is that if you then have a fire, the way these chimneys are designed is each fireplace has its own flue. That flue is designed to be contained and act as the first firewall for a chimney fire. Then outside of that flue is an airspace. All of these flues have different airspaces between them, and then there is a concrete structure for the stack that contains all the chimneys. Our understanding from the drawings and from what we got in the report from 2014 is that that concrete structure is 3 inches of masonry thick. Concrete has an R value of 1, so that means basically that's the rating of insulation. That's rating as 1 inch of concrete is a 1 level of insulation. So there's a total R of 3. That is not considered sufficient to insulate a combustible building against a fire. So if there are combustibles on the other side of that, and a fire were to happen in that stack, that's not enough insulation to reach the proper standard for insulating for preventing the heat from that fire potentially transferring through that concrete barrier. So while we do have our first firewall has been breached, our second firewall we don't have any reason to think it is breached, but it doesn't have enough insulation on its own. Now again, just want to be clear with everybody, I'm not saying this is going to happen. I'm saying this is what could happen if all of this is a worst case scenario. And we don't have the ability to assess this in any more depth or specificity than what we have at this point. These are a couple other pictures in the close-up here of another spot where some parts are put together. I believe this one is actually where the pipe meets the smoke chamber, which was a part that was mentioned in the 2014 report, specifically as being, I'm paraphrasing here, but a little wonky. But he said, I think it's okay, and I don't see any reason why this would represent an increased hazard. So I want to address that kind of language a little bit, and we should probably pull up the report and I can look at the exact language. But there are some points at which that report says, I see the problem. I'm saying I don't assess this as representing any real hazard. That's totally fine. Any professional who wants to say that, if they feel like they are qualified to say that, can say that. For us to look at something, say, I can see a gap right here, but I don't see why it would be a problem, is a level of liability and risk that we're simply not willing to take on. He could be right. He could also be wrong. We don't have the ability to assess it in any further depth than that. And so I'm not in any way trying to impugn what is in that report, although there are a couple of things that are inaccurate that I'll get to in a minute. But that's, I think, the important thing to understand is that we just don't know. And where we don't know, we default to the most conservative reading. Here's another example of a pipe where the weld is no longer together. And again, here's an example looking up where we can see 2 sections of pipe where the weld is not together. So there's multiple ones. It's not every single one, but I believe Will, correct me if I'm wrong, most of the units that we've scanned, we have found at least one weld or joint where there is a visible gap that would allow soot and or fire to escape. Is that accurate, Will?
That is accurate. And also fireplaces that do not have similar issues like the welding, we just see over the years, what we've noticed is that the rust just keeps progressing, but not gone to that stage as where we're seeing a little bit of gaps and separations going on.
Right. So if it's all right at this point, I'm gonna work through the questions that were sent to us and just address them. Will and I wrote them down just so we make sure we got our answers in advance. But I'll go through these, and then if anyone has further questions, we can do that. So the list of questions that was sent to us, the first question we got was, is the work to replace the chimney invasive? And if so, how so? And also, where did you estimate the amount of $10 million? So I think there's potentially some misunderstanding on the idea that there was a $10 million estimate. We had not actually given a proposal at any point to replace the chimneys in the high rises. And that is not work that is within our scope to do as an organization. The way that these chimneys are built, and I'm going to come back to this and explain a little bit more about the construction and the parts of the report that we actually disagreed with directly. This is more the high-rise chimneys, not the other ones, not the townhomes, but the high-rise chimneys. Their construction is more similar to an industrial set of chimneys than it is to a normal set of residential chimneys. So I want to be clear that everything we've said, we are experts in residential chimney systems, and we've been applying the approaches, techniques, and knowledge of a residential chimney company. Now, these are residential chimneys because they're in residences, but from a construction engineering standpoint, the way they're built does not resemble your average residential fireplace or chimney. It much more resembles an industrial setup where you're getting into much more custom builds and things like that. So we do not have a proposal to replace or repair these chimneys. We have some things that we can help with as far as if people wanted to do like electrical things, there are ways to do inserts to get them working again. But if that's the direction that the board and the condo wants to go, then we would strongly recommend looking into someone like an engineering firm who specializes more in that level of industrial work and can take on the right approach to that. So as far as I think the idea of a $10 million proposal, I believe that came out of a conversation between Will and Judy at some point, where there was I think it was more of a casual conversation of what would it take to do this? And I think when Will said something along the lines of, I don't know, $10 million, because now you're talking serious like engineering type stuff. Again, that would not be from us, and I do not know what that number would be, but it's difficult to imagine that doing 54 stacks of custom welded industrial grade chimneys at this height, some of which are 130 feet tall, which I know because I was the one who custom made the cables for it. It's difficult to imagine that number being less than a high 7 or 8 figure number. But again, I don't know what it'd take. So, second question was, if the project is determined to maintain and repair the chimneys, not renovate or replace, does the scope need to meet current code standards? I'm hoping that I'm interpreting this question right. So whoever wrote this, if I don't answer this well, please ask me again later. But again, we're not proposing to renovate the existing chimneys. We do have a strong recommendation for the townhomes, but not for the high rises. Even in the Ashworth report, there is a part where he does not recommend attempting to refurbish the high rise chimneys. What does Rooftop Chimney Sweep's opinion of the Warren Ashworth report in 2014 letter address issues raised by others in 2014 and confirm this report was shared with us? What of Mr. Ashworth's points confirming the safety of our chimneys does Rooftop Chimney Sweeps assert are not valid? And specifically, what physical changes evidenced with contrasting photos clearly show a change from the 2014 inspections by others? How are the issues raised by Rooftop Chimney Sweeps now different quantitatively than the ones raised in 2014? So this is a key point that there is a specific disagreement we had with the Ashworth report, and I do not think there was anything wrong with how Warren Ashworth conducted this. We just did different levels of inspection, and as a result, we have different information. According to Mr. Ashworth, his report was based on reading the original design documents that I believe are from the 80s, mid 80s, if that's accurate. No, are they older than that?
60.
Yeah, close to
60. Okay. So the original design documents, which are at this point roughly 60 years old, as well as a visual inspection basically from the fireplace looking up. We would, in the chimney industry, we refer to that as a level 1 inspection. There are 3 levels of inspection. And that's just the simplest level of it. And I believe he did it on a handful of chimneys, about 5 or 6 chimneys. In doing so, he did find a couple of the things that we saw. And those are the ones that he more or less dismissed, as he did not believe that they represented a credible risk, which is, I don't disagree with anything he said per se. I think we might have different interpretations of it, but I think we saw the same things and agree on that. That's all consistent with what we've seen. What's not consistent is that we have run cameras through the flues multiple times over the past 10 plus years. And in doing so, we're seeing things that he never saw. So the images I shared earlier, he was never able to see that. That was a camera that was 10, 20, 30 feet into the flue, looking at it from 5 or 6 inches away, not looking up from 5 or 6 feet below at an oblique angle where you can't see that kind of thing. I wouldn't have been able to see that either. It's nothing wrong with what he did. It's just we have more in-depth tools for seeing things that he couldn't see. The second part of that is that in the report, the flues are described as being constructed of a refractory insulated inner piping system, so kind of cement pipe, jacketed with an outer steel firewall to contain it. That is not what we have observed. What we've seen and what you can see in here is that the inner liner is steel. You can see it from the rust, you can see it from the welds. Refractory material does not rust, it's like concrete. It does not go together with welds. And the refractory pipes that are described in the original design documents are set up to like a male-female socketing system where they connect together and fit together. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just not what's there. And I can't explain why what's in the design documents that he referenced is not what we see when we look at these chimneys. All that we can explain is what we see when we look at these chimneys, and we documented it in pretty exhausting detail. So I just want to be clear about that. I don't know why they don't look the same. They just don't. Our opinion, I'm not disagreeing with Ashworth or saying anything about his ability to do this, but simply that our direct documentary evidence that is recent and has been confirmed multiple times over multiple sessions, I think should take precedent as evidence over drawings from 60 years ago. That's my only argument on that. How many of the 54 high-rise chimneys did we test? How many of the house chimneys were inspected? I'm just going to be clarifying on terms a little bit here. We didn't test any of them. We inspected them and we scanned them. If I were to say test, to me that indicates that maybe I put a fire in them to see what happened. We didn't do that. I believe we may have done a couple test fires over the years for various residents, mostly when they asked us to or something like that. But we did not do that in any systemic way. We did inspect 50 of the 54 high-rise chimneys. 4 of them, I believe, we did not have the ability to inspect most recently. Of the townhouse chimneys, Will, can you answer that? Did we do all of them this most recent time?
We did all the townhomes and the historic as well.
Yeah. So, we've inspected all of those multiple times. I've actually personally inspected all of the townhomes and historic homes myself and run cameras through them. The next question is what are the limitations to the types of electric fireplaces we can install? There's no limitations to the types of electric fireplace we can install. The only limitation is the size. We want to be able to fit something into the existing boxes that are there. That would allow us to do that installation without having to do any kind of major modifications. If we were going to draw a proposal, we'd like to recommend the Regency I-29 LCD that would fit in these units very nicely. It's one of the most modern electric fireplaces out there. It's very realistic looking as far as electric fireplaces go. And for those of you who are electric skeptics, I feel you, I understand you. I've been working on chimneys since I was 13 years old, and electric fireplaces are a little strange to me too. But I am surprised at how good they continue to get. And the more the market seems to be going that way. But that said, any electric system that has the right clearances and stuff, which all of these should, any electric fireplace system or fireplace insert would work fine. What is the difference in cost and process between restoring the chimneys to wood burning condition and restoring them for safety but non-wood burning use? that is difficult to even